Hiya, folks. So I just completely botched this review. I had recorded the entire thing and I don't know how I messed up, but I messed up somehow. So we're going to try this again. Thank you for voting on my community tab for what I should watch and compare. This is my review for Return of the Living Dead 3, which is a 1993 movie that is kind of a horror romantic zombie movie. And The Void, which is a cosmic horror kind of Lovecraftian type movie. I don't think either of them might have had a big budget. I remember both of them having very similar reviews on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes and other platforms that do reviewing as well. So it was pretty, I think, consistent across the board. Now, Return of the Living Dead is a well-beloved film. It's a little bit of a cult classic. The people that have talked to me about this film before very much love this film. They saw this when they were younger and they grew up on it. And in some cases, it was their introduction to the horror genre. So I definitely see how this movie could have been a comfort movie for those people and could bring people into the horror genre. Unfortunately, I'm 40, so this isn't my introductory video into the horror genre. That being said, it's not like I don't like the movie. I do. I actually thought that it was quite lovely. It was campy. I don't think it was meant to be a good movie. I think it was meant to kind of be kind of bad. And it knew that. It wasn't trying to be something it wasn't. It wasn't trying to be all fancy by any means. And I appreciate that of that movie. It just wouldn't be a movie that I would reach for. That's that movie. The Void is kind of a different idea. Like, I heard nothing about this movie. I didn't know that this movie existed. It wasn't until Spooky Astronauts started talking about this movie and the body horror that I even had it on my radar. I had no idea. And to be fair, cosmic horror usually isn't my thing. I'm not against Lovecraftian films. I think it's called Lovecraftian. Anyway, I'm not against cosmic horror in films and Lovecraftian themes in films. Not against them. But I don't tend to lean that way. I kind of side-eyed a little bit of this movie based off of that. Both movies kind of gave me a little bit of preconceived notions and expectations going in. On one hand, I have something that's kind of a beloved cult film that a lot of people reference and a lot of people saw when they were younger and might have broken them into the genre of spooky movies and all things horror. And on the other hand, I have something that I have heard nobody talk about and might be a genre of horror that I particularly don't like. It might be a flop. I was a little bit shocked because it was actually the other way. I usually like zombie movies. I usually really dig that, and that's up my street for sure. And I'm usually not into cosmic horror. How is it that I really liked The Void and not dislike, but liked very little in comparison, Return of the Living Dead 3? I want to say both movies were enjoyable to watch. Didn't have a problem. I would say that Return of the Living Dead 3 had great Practical effects, I especially liked the effects that were used on that one character and the use of the transformation of a person into a zombie and the use of things that you don't normally equate with that transition. I mean, in Return of the Living Dead 1, they introduced the idea that zombies are actually in quite a bit of pain and they become subdued and they get some relief from that pain from eating brains. Apparently, this was a concept that wasn't done before that. So this movie explores kind of the next step, kind of the step of, okay, so I'm turning into a zombie. I'm in a lot of pain. The only thing that will relieve me of this pain is eating brains, and I'm gonna discover self-mutilation. So I enjoyed that. And I'm not gonna go further into that because I don't want to spoil anything. And I'm not spoiling anything because you can see that from the cover of the movie that there's something going on there. And the practical effects of marrying that idea with visuals, totally on board with. Loved those scenes. Absolutely. The Void doesn't necessarily build on something that's known, although this is me talking where I am not into cosmic horror. So there might be something about cosmic horror that I'm not aware of. But to me, I don't think this was building on a previous idea. I think this was a brand new kind of thing. Although it wasn't building on the idea, the practical effects were done especially well here too. And the difference between the effects was that the practical effects in Return of the Living Dead were kind of done with the characters of the plot themselves. Whereas in The Void, the characters of that movie generally had minimal effects added to them. Actually, I don't think that's true. A majority of the cast didn't have a lot of impact when it comes to practical effects. Not all of them, but a majority. A majority didn't. I very much appreciated the way the practical effects were used, how much we got to see of the practical effects. They didn't do any cheap shots like a practical effect not actually being all that great, but because there's a shaky cam, you're not able to get a good look at the monster or the practical effects, and therefore they look a lot better than they actually are. And no shade, I mean, Jaws did this very effectively with something that might not have worked if you really got a good look at him. But they let you see. They let you have a good gander at the horror that was the body horror or the monster horror that they were bringing on screen. They did a great job with the creativity of their monsters. I'm not sure if they must have had contortionists and whatever, because there was a lot going on with some of these monsters. I'm just gonna leave it there. So I would say between Return of the Living Dead 3 and The Void, as far as practical effects go and the usage and whether that made sense and were impactful, I would say that The Void wins. Although I definitely do appreciate how the Return of the Living Dead seemed to up the ante of a previously talked about theme. Moving on to mood. which of the two movies did I find have a good mood or have a more prominent mood? You know, what did I think of the pacing, etc.? I would say that two very different styles of movies here. Return of the Living Dead 3 didn't seem to have a fast pace to it. It was very interesting because it felt like it could have. There was definitely a time aspect, but I didn't feel there was any kind of rush. It definitely hit home the stakes that were involved in the movie, but it didn't carry me. It didn't feel long by any stretch. I was entertained, but it didn't feel like, I don't know, the characters didn't feel like they were in a hurry. It wasn't really a moody film, I feel. I feel it could have been a creepy film. It could have been a lot of things, but I didn't feel that it was any of those things. It kind of just felt like it was. It didn't feel creepy. It didn't feel spooky. It just kind of was. In contrast, The Void felt very moody to me. It was very spooky. It was very eerie. I mean, it didn't feel like it took cheap shots in the spookiness or to make things eerie or whatever. It felt like, you know, it was well drawn out in some parts. I do feel like there was a few moments where it was a pacing issue, where the movie slowed down or sped up or whatever. It didn't feel like it carried momentum in some spots. It felt like there was some slower spots for sure. But again, they made a very good point to say what the stakes were. But I will say something that's against them is they didn't really clarify why the stakes were what they were. It wasn't until later on in the film that you figure some things out, and that was kind of, I think, needed for the understanding of context about the stakes themselves. So when it comes to mood, I think I would choose The Void again, because The Void seemed to have a definite mood. It didn't seem to be just a movie that was happening, that you were watching and had fantastic things happen in it. It seemed to have a definite, like, undertone of something. I feel like it won. So I'm going to talk about plot and dialogue. The plot and dialogue, I don't know what you would expect from Return of the Living Dead 3. Not sure what you would expect there. Did it have a plot? Yes. Did it have bad dialogue? Yes. Do I think that they were trying to have insightful dialogue? No, I don't think so. So was it fine? It was fine. Both of those things were fine. There was enough plot to kind of carry the movie, to kind of make it make sense why a character goes from point A and ends up at point B. That makes sense. But it's kind of the bare bones is what you get. Fun, but bare bones. The Void has a little bit more of a plot. Now, it's not a perfect movie. There are definite parts of the plot where I'm like, now why is this like this? This doesn't make sense. But it does tend to have a little bit less cringy dialogue than The Return of the Living Dead. Not by much. I don't get the sense that either of them had a big budget. Totally fine. So I think that there's a tie here. I think on the subject of plot and dialogue, I think it's kind of a tie. I want to say that The Void I enjoyed more, but there was far more in The Void where I was like, huh. Than in Return of the Living Dead, where the entire movie made me go, huh? But it was meant to. And there were some things in The Void which I very much appreciated. Did not get over explained. I liked that they didn't discover and try to neatly wrap up everything. I liked that. But still some things just plain old didn't make sense, and fine. I'm gonna see it again. So we'll see if I think the same thing for the second watch. I think acting in this movie, again, I think the acting is kind of on an even keel. They both didn't have a ton of characters that you had to remember and wade throughout the movie. So it kind of allowed a little bit of character development, although there wasn't a lot of character development on either side. It wasn't that kind of movie, I don't think. I don't think I would recommend either movie for a party. I mean, neither of the movies you have to actively watch. They're a little bit more forgiving, but I don't see them as being at a party and on in the background and people milling about doing their thing, and then a part in the movie happens and a person, shouts out a part and people watch it for a little bit for that part and then just go about their lives for the rest of the party. I don't really see it as that, but I do see both of them in a friend atmosphere for a movie night. I do see both of these movies having a little bit of leniency about if you need to overtalk, if you need to pause, if you need to whatever. I see the movie having a little bit of flexibility there. So I think it would work in those contexts. Although I will say, Return of the Living Dead 3, important to get that 3 in there. I do think that it would be okay if it was shown at the very end of a party where things are winding down, everybody's drunk off their gourd, and they just want to put on a movie and be entertained and not have to think too much about a plot or whatever and just have a good time. I think it would be fine for that. I don't see The Void being fine for that. So Return of the Night of the Living Dead wins for this one for sure. Now, how would I recommend these movies? I would recommend Return of the Living Dead to somebody that really likes a lot of camp in their movies, that really doesn't want a really scary kind of haunted house type thing, but doesn't really want a blatant in your face gore fest. I would recommend it to somebody that has a soft spot for horror romance, because it's labeled as a horror romance if you look it up online. I would recommend The Return of the Living Dead also to somebody that was very new in horror. I can understand why a lot of people saw this movie when they were younger and how in some cases it was a person's introduction to the horror genre. The Void is a different story. I would recommend it to a different type of people. It's not campy. I don't see it have a lot of camp. I don't see it have a lot of humor. What I do see is really good body horror and really good practical effects. This would be a little bit more seasoned. I don't think that a person needs to have a big relationship with horror before watching this movie at all. But I do think that it gets kind of extreme in the body horror aspect of things. So if people were really good with that, I would recommend that. I would also recommend it for someone that wants to experience what cosmic horror is like, because there's definitely a little bit of that too. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody that has an issue with pregnancy and horror and having your pregnancy go wrong. Do I think either of the movies are good for a rewatch? Now, I wouldn't choose to rewatch Return of the Living Dead 3. I don't think so. I don't think it's one that I got enough out of to rewatch in a fun way. Although, if somebody that I knew wanted to watch this movie, I'd watch this movie with them. I would have no problem with that. But I don't think this is one that I would choose myself. The Void, I would definitely watch again. I really liked that movie. I can see that happen again. I can see me watch that. It's not set in around a particular holiday or whatever, so I don't see it necessarily be on a roster for Halloween films or something like that, but just a good all-around horror flick. I would watch that anytime. So between the two, like I said, very different films, and I enjoyed them both. But between the two, the one that I think wins is The Void. Although there was a few aspects that Return of the Living Dead definitely did better, I think that The Void still wins the day. So let me know if you agree with me on that, or if you don't. So there you have it, folks. There is my review for Return of the Living Dead 3 and The Void. I'm about to put on my community tab some movies that I see on Tubi or Shudder that I could watch head to head and give you my reviews. If you have comment or something that you think that I should watch, put it down in the comments. I would love to hear what else is out there. There are so many movies that I have no idea about. Take Void, for instance. I had no idea that movie existed. I am kind of restricted to Shudder and Tubi at the moment. Otherwise, it might be something that goes on my list, but I'm not able to review at this time. So keep that in mind when you're suggesting, but absolutely, I love to hear new ideas about different movies. With that note, I am going to say, I know it's past date, so belated happy Thanksgiving to everybody that celebrates. To everybody else, I hope you're having a great time in the situation that you find yourself today, and I will talk to you later.